Got 25-minute talk and hopefully a bit of time for some Q&A. Take it away.
Hello. Hello, hi everyone. Hi, come on. Hello. Perfect. I can see. So it's about GitOps first deployment, right? Argo CD and beyond. But who am I? So I'm just a Kubernetes head with a traveling soul. So full time I'm a traveler, and to pay my rents, I work at Defron as a solution architect. I'm also a CNCF ambassador. I'm also a AWS community builder, CNCF New Delhi chapter organizer, founder and author at DevOps Diary, which is pretty much dead these days because it's been a year I have pushed anything on this publication. But yeah, it's one of the publication. What is GitOps? So I assume everyone here must be aware of GitOps, right? Everyone must be doing GitOps and ArgoCD. Anyone would like to pick this up, or it's the fusion of elephant's head and penguin's body? What is GitOps? Come on. Okay. So it's just the fusion of elephant's head and a penguin's body. Basically, it's more than that. So it's a practice. It's a practice of deploying applications onto Kubernetes using Git as a single source of truth, wherein you separate your different repositories, and there are different core principles which GitOps stands for. The very first one stands for version control. Basically, Git having single source of truth, right? Where you push all your Kubernetes configurations at one place, where you define the configurations in a declarative fashion so that you have a consistent configuration which can be deployed across multiple different environments. Basically, the declarative configurations. The third point is drift management. Again, GitOps is known for the reconciliation, right? Having a robust drift management solution wherein you can check the different configurations, and if there are any drift between the actual and the desired state, it will reconcile automatically. The next is continuous delivery. Again, it facilitates the automated deployments, having faster deliveries and faster go-to-markets for the applications or the software, basically. The next, GitOps tool. Again, so there are ample of tools in GitOps, right, which are being used. But two of the most popular tools are ArgoCD and FluxCD. And for any engineer, it's a dilemma, right? Which one to choose, which one to go with. So let's go with the ArgoCD, the one that is one of the most popular one, and we have been talking about ArgoCD for long now. So what exactly is ArgoCD? So ArgoCD is all about not using kubectl apply in your clusters, right? It's about having a declarative GitOps-based configurations. So as per the ArgoCD documentation, it's a GitOps-based continuous delivery tool for Kubernetes. The main objective of ArgoCD is one of the objective of ArgoCD is reconciliation engine, right? So it synchronizes with the configurations that are being pushed to the Git repository with the actual state of the workloads which are running on your Kubernetes cluster. A small overview of the components of ArgoCD, or let's say a small overview of the architecture of ArgoCD. The very first is API server, which manages the REST APIs and the user interface through which you interact with your applications. That can be the GUI or it can be the ArgoCD CLI as well. The second is repository server, which handles all the interactions with the Git repository, basically. So if there are any new commits, it will fetch it and cache it within your application manifest for deployments, right? The next one is application controller, the third one, which actually constantly keeps an eye on that particular Git repository where you push all your Kubernetes configurations, checks if that particular configuration that you have pushed in the GitOps repository is the same as the one that you are actually running on a Kubernetes cluster, or if there is any drift. If there are any drifts, it will automatically reconcile it to the desired state, right? These are the main three components of ArgoCD, or let's call it overview of the ArgoCD architecture. But let me make a statement here. So ArgoCD is a Git syncing tool. How many of you agree with this? Please raise your hands. ArgoCD is a Git syncing tool. I can see just a couple of hands. So it's not a Git syncing tool. What do you think about it? Anyone? It makes sense, right? Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so ArgoCD is not. ArgoCD is more than a continuous deployment tool, right? It's not exactly a continuous deployment tool when we say the entire full-fledged continuous deployment. ArgoCD is more of a Git syncing tool from its principles, right? Is ArgoCD is equivalent to full-stack continuous deployment tool? So ideally, what do you think about it? Anyone here like to speak up on any of the topics here? Is ArgoCD equivalent to full-stack continuous deployment tool, or it's a part of the entire ecosystem? What do you say? Anyone? So what is your ideal checklist of a continuous deployment tool? For example, for me, a ideal checklist for a continuous deployment tool would be, let's say, in my continuous deployment tool, I would want to have rollback, right? The flexible ways of rollback, basically one of the checklists that I would want for my continuous deployment tool. Or let's say I would like to have a flexible way of deployments, right? A control way of deploying my application onto the Kubernetes clusters, where I can control the way I want to do it. Or maybe I want to have a flexible workflow, right? I want to run the workflow as per my use cases. So again, policies and governments can be one of my ideal checklists for a continuous deployment tool, right? Wherein I want to block certain things going in the production environment, or I can create certain pipelines with certain configurations, right? So the ideal checklist of a continuous deployment tool would vary from different organization to organization, depending upon the requirements, right? So there is no as such hard and fast rule or one particular checklist which is true for everything. But the continuous deployment tool does need these kind of capabilities, right? A lot more than that as well. So when we move to the cloud-native ecosystem, right, it's not that good, right? Basically, if you see here, right, ArgoCD is one piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire puzzle, right? It's not the entire continuous deployment tool. It's one part of the entire ecosystem. Now, ArgoCD and beyond. So when I say, okay, so please scan this QR code. So this, and you can enter your email ID and name basically. So if you want to sign up for the DevFronts newsletter, wherein we publish all different this kind of blogs and resources related to cloud-native ecosystem. Coming back to the topic, so ArgoCD, when combined with different other things, other capabilities, right, it makes the entire continuous deployment ecosystem. For example, flexible rollback capabilities. When I say flexible rollback, it doesn't mean just rolling back the entire previous commit, right? Maybe I just want to roll back my previous container image, for example, or I just want to roll back my previous configurations. Or if I go a step ahead, I want to set up automated SLO-based rollbacks, for example. If certain checks has been passed, then automatically it should roll back to the previous version. That can be one of the requirements, right? Again, support for advanced deployment strategies. For example, for my production environment, I want to go with the blue-green deployments, right? Or maybe canary deployments, for instance. Again, there are tools which can be integrated. For example, Argo rollout, but there is an overhead of integrating that tool, right? Policy enforcement and governance. For instance, I would like to block all the container images which have certain vulnerabilities in my production environment, right? So that can be again one of the checklists for my continuous deployment environment, or that can be one of the piece of the puzzle that needs that will complete the entire continuous deployment ecosystem. Fine-grained controlled deployments across multiple different environments. For example, let's say if I want to deploy my application onto 3 different clusters, right? Let's say staging cluster, dev cluster, and my production cluster. But for one particular release, I don't want to release it to the staging environment, and I directly want to release to the other 2 environments, right? I should be having a control way where I can deploy all those, configure those deployment patterns. Or let's say the Black Friday sale, right? The Black Friday sale is going on, and I want to block all my deployments to the production environment. How do I do that, right? Having a control way of those deployments, having a, for example, blackout window, right? For instance. Having such deployment patterns will help me achieve these goals. Auto remediations is again one of the examples to automate the certain tasks, right? For example, one of the classic example of auto remediation can be, let's say HPA max out, right? The maximum replica count that you have given in HPA is reached. Now what do you do about that? So in automated remediations, you can write those runbooks which will automatically increase the max replica count of the HPA, and again, it will fix your issue, right? Microservices dependency gaps. It is again one of the important aspects when we talk about the entire continuous deployment ecosystem. Why? For instance, there are 3 microservices, right? Microservice A, B, and C, and all these 3 are interdependent on each other, right? So whenever you deploy those different microservices onto a particular Kubernetes cluster, let's say if anything fails down, right? Ideally, you will have instead of rolling back individually all those microservices, you can bundle them and create a release out of it, right? And instantly you can roll back the entire release, which will roll back all the 3 different microservices. Having a way to define all those different microservices which are interdependent on each other, which you can directly see in the dashboard, basically in any of the system, deployment system, and thereafter bundling those releases and rolling back those releases. Having the workflow flexibility, basically, again, it's one of the aspects of the entire continuous deployment ecosystem, wherein, for instance, I want to run certain pre-deployment and post-deployment stages for my workflow, right, for my continuous deployment environment. Now, let's take a scenario wherein in my post-deployment, it says certain things might fail, right, but that doesn't mean that my deployment is not successful. If I give a small example, in case of ArgoCD, right, there are pre-hooks and post-hooks, right, which you can use for those kind of jobs, right? But if any of those pre or the post hooks fails down, the ArgoCD application status will continue to be in the in-progress state, and it will continue to reconcile. Reconcile with the GitOps repository to detect the drift, and the status of the application would be in progress. But technically, your application has been deployed, right? If the post hooks are being failed. So having a flexibility to run those kind of complex workflows, wherein I had the flexibility to run just the pre-deployment stage, or just the post-deployment stage, or the entire workflow wherein the first pre-deployment stages are being passed, wherein I might have DB migrations, for example, Django DB migrations. After the migrations are being done, the application is deployed to the target Kubernetes cluster. Once the application is actually deployed on the target Kubernetes cluster, in my post-deployment stage, maybe I want to close my Jira ticket, for example, or send a notification to a specific email, or update a GitHub PR request. All those activities can be done, right? So having a control around all those different workflows again makes the entire ecosystem. And these are just some of the points. There can be some other points as well, which completes the entire continuous deployment ecosystem. Powerful independently, invincible together. And this is true for everything in cloud native ecosystem, right? So in cloud native ecosystem, we have a lot of different tools. For example, ArgoCD itself, right? ArgoCD. Every tool in itself is very much powerful, but again, when combined together, it makes the entire platform. To defeat the Thanos, the entire Avenger team needs to be assembled, right? So that's how it works here as well. Now, introducing Deftron. So navigating the world of GitOps with Deftron. Deftron is an open source Kubernetes-native software delivery platform, which is built upon on the top of these cloud-native tools that we have been talking about. So with Deftron, you should be able to achieve the entire Kubernetes-native CI/CD pipelines, creating your entire CI workflows, the deployment workflows, however you want to create, and in whichever fashion you want to create. It eases out the entire day-to operations, for example, checking out the logs, troubleshooting, debugging, anything that you want to do on the top of Kubernetes. You would be able to create policies and guardrails around the entire platform, the entire ecosystem, wherein, for example, maybe in your entire CI/CD pipeline, right? Let's say for your production pipeline, ideally you want to create a policy wherein the CI pipeline should go through a SonarQube check, for example, right? If certain criteria is passed, then only it should go ahead. Or let's say for your production environment, you would want to have approval workflows, right? Having an approval-based deployment, or even multi-stage approval deployments, for example, even for your configurations. The user access management part of the entire Kubernetes ecosystem, observability, troubleshooting. So Deftron is a one-stop solution for all things Kubernetes, basically. Now it's show time, so let me quickly share my screen and share a couple of screens here. Okay. So this is how the dashboard looks like. It's a sample, it's a sandbox environment where you can log in with your GitHub credentials. Let me quickly log on. So this is a preview.deftron.ai is a sample sandbox environment where you can log in with your GitHub credentials. Deftron does have native integration with all different SSO providers that you want to use, and the fine-grained access control for your applications deployed onto the Kubernetes. So I'm not going to give the entire walkthrough of the platform, but let's just talk about some of the points here. Okay, the internet, I guess. Once. Maybe I need to switch my network. No, that's fine. Perfect. So these are the applications which are already being deployed in this particular environment and across multiple different environments that you can see here, the multi-cloud, multi-cluster applications basically. Let me quickly go to a specific application, let's say the demo application. That's why people say we should record your videos before giving the live demos. Perfect. I have learned my lesson now. Workflow, yeah. So you can see here, right, for any of the application, you should be able to create any kind of workflows here, the entire CI/CD workflows. And when I talk about the entire deployment ecosystem, let's say, for example, this is my production environment, right? In my production environment, when I create a production deployment for my environment production, I should be able to define how exactly I want this deployment to be. For example, I want to have an approval-based deployment, right? I can simply enable the approval toggle for that. I can define who should be able to approve this particular images to be deployed in the production environment, or even I can define a specific number of approvals that I need from the respective approvers. And the user who should be able to approve those particular images can be controlled through RBAC itself. Now, pre-deployment and post-deployment ecosystem. So basically, there are multiple different plugins which are already available within the dashboard that you can see here that can be natively integrated within the different pipelines. For example, let's say if I want to integrate, let's say I want to run any migration, for example, right? I might have this Golang migrate, a plugin which I can use to run the migrations before the deployment happens. Or let's say if I want to go ahead and close a Jira ticket, for instance, right? I can see my Jira plugins which are already available here, or maybe the GitHub plugins which are already available here, which I can integrate directly within those environments. And even if I want to create a plugin of my own, that's way too straightforward. Simply write your custom scripts here, and you should be able to save that particular as a plugin, giving some of the environment variables. The entire documentation is already available at the docs.dev.ai, which you can use for that, for creating the entire CD pipeline. Now again, for the configurations, right? If you see here, there is something called product configurations, wherein you should be able to enable the approvals for even for your configurations as well. Let's say I have enabled my approvals for my production environment. For my production environment, whatever configuration that I have given, right, I should be able to control those configurations. If there are any changes made to this configuration, it first needs an approver. And once the approver has approved those configurations, then only it will be deployed to the respective environment. Now again, let's say if I want to deploy my application onto respective production environment, for example, right? And before deploying deploying my application to the production environment, ideally I would want to see what are the configuration changes which I have made. For example, I can see the entire config diff. So since there are no configuration diff here itself within the last deployment and the last save config, I won't be able to see any diff here. But if there are any configuration changes, you can directly review it before you actually deploy on the respective environment. Or even if I want to roll back, right? For example, let's say I want to roll back for this particular release. I have different configurations. I have different ways different combinations I should be able to roll back to my previous release. And there also I can see the entire diff, which are the things which has been changed. Let's say, for example, here there's an ingress name has been changed here. Yep, there is an ingress name has been changed here in the previous release, so it will take it to my previous version basically. Same thing if I want to roll back just to a specific config with the last deployed config along with the images, or even if I want to directly roll back to the last save config or the last deployed config, I should be able to roll back with these different options. Or if I want to set up the SLO based rollbacks, again in my workflow, I should be able to get those plugins which I can integrate within the pipeline itself. Let's say post deployment stage, right? The SLO based plugins, the SLO based rollbacks. I should be able to define those criteria for which if those particular criteria are not met, then I should be able to roll back it to my previous releases. Now, once my application is being deployed, I should be able to see all my applications which are deployed across multiple different environments, the real-time status of those applications, the deployment status, the application metrics, along with all the resources for this particular microservice here itself in a resource group view, wherein you should be able to see different resources which are already being created. For example, let's say the staging environment, right? In my staging environment, again, the application status is missing here. But if the deployment is successful, then you should be able to see the entire application status as well. So these are the real-time status which are being fetched from ArgoCD itself, the GitOps-based deployments. So internally, Devtron leverages ArgoCD for the entire GitOps principles. So whatever benefits that you get with ArgoCD, right? What are the operations that you do with ArgoCD? All those things can be carried out with Devtron. On the top of that, it builds up the entire deployment ecosystem basically. Now, coming back to the presentations, since we don't have much time, yeah. Cool. So these are some of the getting started guide for Devtron. You can scan the QR code and you will directly land to the GitHub page. It does have, it is an open source platform which you can see in the GitHub and you can install on your Kubernetes clusters. And thereafter you should be able to start your Kubernetes-native deployments. Should I move to the next slide? Perfect. So any questions? Yeah.
When you were selecting the deployment, I think that was a Helm values file that you were showing of like selecting what to deploy. Would that GUI operation go back to Git and put those values back to Git?
Yeah, it will. Exactly, it will. So that's the GitOps is all about. Yeah. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
We also have this cargo software coming up, which like how do you compare cargo with this Devtron software?
Yeah, so cargo does the entire image promotion thing, right? It's more towards the image promotion thing. With Devtron, you get a lot of other things around the ecosystem as well. For example, the plugin ecosystem which we have seen, right? The deployment windows wherein you can define certain parameters. For example, let's say the Black Friday sale, right? For this particular period of time, you want to block the deployments for a specific environment, that you should be able to create it. Now, if I talk about the deployment flexibility, right? Deployment filters are there, which are the CL-based deployments, CL-based filters, which you should be able to create within Devtron itself. There are deployment log configurations, which you should be able to create with Devtron, right? So there are a lot of other things which builds up the entire platform here. So in the demo, it's not that, so I don't have that much time for to showcase all those things, but there are a lot of different things which differentiate Devtron with Cargo. Maybe we can talk about this afterwards, or you can meet us at booth R13 at KubeCon and we can have a deeper discussion on this. Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.